Hi, this is Robert Hoffman with ITI, and we're talking innovation with Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Robert, my pleasure to be with you.
Terrific. Well, let me launch right into it. You are the original sponsor, along with several of your colleagues, of a piece of legislation called Startup Act 2.0. If you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about that legislation and the components of it that you think are going to help revitalize the U.S. economy.
Well, I actually believe this piece of legislation is one that's awfully important to the country, to our country's economy, and particularly at the moment where our circumstances with unemployment are so bad. I came to Congress certainly to the Senate, as an individual who was very concerned about the national debt, the amount of money we're spending beyond the revenue that we take in, and I was frustrated by the fact that we weren't doing much to solve that problem. By reducing spending or finding the right balance between revenue and spending. And so I started looking for another way to address the deficit. And it occurred to me that a more enjoyable way of addressing the deficit is growing the economy.
Absolutely.
And growth matters, and we can certainly better address our country's fiscal needs and get ourselves back on track as an economy, as a country with an economy that's growing, than one that's not. Mm-hmm. And about that time, information from the Hoffman Foundation on entrepreneurship landed on my desk. They had a number of policy proposals. First, they outlined the facts about the number of jobs created and what's happened in the economy. The net job creation in the last 5 years has generally come from innovation and startup companies, followed by a number of policy recommendations. And that had great appeal to me. And the science behind that was appealing to me. It looked like the work had been done with great credibility. And so we decided, let's draft a piece of legislation that outlines a number of those proposals, those recommendations that might help startup companies have a better chance of success. And around here in the Congress, as we see, not much happens in getting a piece of legislation passed, and certainly nothing happens unless there's some bipartisan effort. So I started looking for a bipartisan sponsor, an ally in this cause, and Senator Warner from Virginia, a Democrat, I'm a Republican. We approached him. He's an entrepreneur himself, and fortunately from my perspective, he got interested in the same topic that I did, and we partnered to introduce something called the Startup Act. And it deals with about 5 aspects of changing the nature of the policies here in Washington, D.C. that might improve the chance that somebody who has an idea goes to their garage, their backyard, their basement, their barn, and starts working on trying to take an idea to market. Maybe they have a greater chance of success if we address the issues of capital formation, the tax code, not discouraging people from investing in those kind of companies, the regulatory environment. It's awfully expensive if you have to hire lawyers and accountants to get through the permitting process, those kind of things that may be barriers, are barriers to a startup company. Access to the necessary labor pool. Talent matters, and particularly so much of today's entrepreneurship and startup companies are related to innovation, technical innovation, technology, and so access to highly educated and trained individuals to provide the talent that we need to grow those economies. Competition among states can be useful to create environments where states are vying to create an environment where entrepreneurs can succeed. So we set out to put those kind of policy ideas into legislative language. Senator Warner and I introduced that bill. It got some good marks from a number of places across the business community, and then we started looking for other supporters in the political process. And Senator Coons, a Democrat from Delaware, Senator Marco Rubio, a Republican from Florida, they'd introduced a bill that dealt mostly with capital formation and some regulatory issues, called the AGREE Act. We suggested that we combine our efforts and introduced, combined, the 4 of us, Startup 2.0. Again, designed to give an entrepreneur no guarantees, that's not the free market system, but a better shot at succeeding than they otherwise would have with policies that have been in place for a long time that either discourage or certainly create impediments toward entrepreneurial success in the United States.
Well, you touched on an important aspect of the legislation, and that is, it has bipartisan support, and oftentimes, unfortunately, bipartisanship is seen as a path to potentially political problems down the road. But you have been able to bring together not only a bipartisan coalition, but the other thing that's been very interesting is the amount of attention that the legislation is getting in the startup community. I was actually in the Silicon Valley and talking with a number of people who are involved in startups or relatively young tech companies, and they're bringing up your legislation. They're asking me, how's Startup Act 2.0 doing? What are the chances of passage? What do you attribute the interest from so many quarters, particularly those who aren't really engaged in the political process? I mean, what do you think has been helpful to you in terms of getting that support?
A couple of things. With the high unemployment rate, there's lots of people who are looking for ways to put food on their family's table, and starting their own business is one of those fallback positions. If you have lost your job, going out and starting your own business is certainly a way to respond to that problem. The United States, our economy has always been based upon entrepreneurship. In my home state of Kansas, long list of people who started companies in their garage and barns that now are world-known companies. And so we have that innately, I think, as Americans, that desire. And certainly the growth of the economy is occurring on the technology side. And there is a real hunger for the opportunity to get government kind of out of the way. It's one of the things I would point up about the Startup Act. It was pointed out to me by an engineer that to get a rocket to fly or an airplane to take off, you have a couple of forces at work, and you got thrust, and that's one thing. But this bill is not about thrust; it's about getting the impediments out of the way so that drag is reduced. So you bring thrust and drag together to get a rocket to fly or an airplane to launch. And the deal here is we're not creating new programs, we're not spending a lot more money. This is about getting the drag reduced so that plane or rocket can fly more easily, more readily. And that can appeal to a broad sector of certainly the economy, but certainly elected officials. Difficult to get a number of us to go create a huge set of new government programs and that encourage entrepreneurship. What we're doing here is letting the entrepreneur pursue the things that they think make sense to them without government being the problem. And so that has appeal across a wide political spectrum across the economic gamut of our country. And we've gone out and tried to promote this. And one of the things that has happened at about the same time we're doing Startup, SOPA and PIPA arrive
right.
in the world of politics and technology. And you saw this major development in which folks were able to use the internet to influence political decisions in Washington, D.C. And that I think there's a recognition on the part of a new set of folks paying attention to the nation's capital that they have great influence, can have great influence. And so part of this is just the timing of which issues that are included in Startup 2.0 are things that many of those in the technology world find very appealing.
Well, first of all, ITI's member companies are greatly appreciative of the work that you've done on Startup Act, and for good reason. All of our member companies were at one time startups, and so we can certainly appreciate that and the value that this startup community brings to the overall economic health of the country. So we hope that with ITI's support and with the support of our fellow knowledge economy members, we can provide a little bit of thrust for your legislation or various components of it going forward.
ITI is a great partner, and we appreciate that thrust. I really do believe that if the communities that are of interest get involved, this is an issue. The legislation that we're talking about here, Startup 2.0, has broad support. Hard to find critics in Washington, D.C., in Congress that think this is a bad idea. The immigration, the visa issues that are included in this bill are very important. They perhaps create the most controversy of all the items in the bill. But I would guess that even those are supported by 80% of the policymakers in the nation's capital. And if we can get the encouragement from ITI and like-minded organizations and industries to say, this is important to us, this matters, and it will help create jobs, particularly in advance of the November elections, job creation is even more important as a political issue. We just would ask that what happened with the SOPA and PIPA, its political efforts are something that are directed toward, SOPA and PIPA opponents were successful in opposing something. We hope that those who have that same access to technology to communicate with us in Washington, D.C. can use it to support something.
Well, we couldn't agree with you more, and we greatly appreciate your leadership in starting up this important debate, no pun intended. But thank you again for joining us. Again, Robert Hoffman with ITI, and we've been talking innovation, startup innovation, with Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas. Thank you again, Senator.
Thanks, Robert.